Please don't tell anyone how I live.
Well, hello there, and thank you for joining me for a very special episode of the Xenoblade Chronicles 3. That's right, it's a very special episode because it's a ranking episode. You know how I love ranking episodes. I mean, I don't know if you know, but if you do know, then you know. You know?
And if you don't know, now you know.
So in this episode, I decided I was going to rank all of the different areas in Xenoblade Chronicles 3 based on how livable I find them. So in this scenario, I'm imagining that I'm someone in the game who has the same capabilities as someone in the game. So like if a monster approached me or something, I'd be able to handle that, no problem. Because if we're talking about me personally moving into one of these regions, then I would be dead. The only place I could move into is the city, because that's the only place that doesn't have roving monsters just waiting to snack on me. We're gonna pretend I am a person who's living out here and there's no more war and we're all just being peaceful happiness in the endless now. Let's just pretend, okay?
It'll be fun.
So I decided I was gonna make this a list video as opposed to a tier video just because there's not that many of the regions and I think I'm gonna be able to get through them faster this way. And I like to experiment with different formats, so, you know, here we are.
Fair enough.
This list will be going from least to most livable because I think that is the way that it's gonna be least predictable. I think the least livable locations are probably some of the more obvious ones. So we're gonna get those out of the way first, and then we're gonna move on to the ones that are probably more up for debate, because there are gonna be different people who think different regions are nice. So I'm gonna tell you why I would choose specific regions, and it's just based purely on my personal perspective, and you might have different reasons for choosing a region, and that's totally cool with me because not you.
What?
So for me, I'm thinking of really three things about the region that I need to consider. One, its climate. What am I gonna look forward to every day in terms of weather? Two, its aesthetic. How pretty it is. I want to have a nice view when I wake up in the morning or right before I go to sleep. I just think that's nice. And three, proximity to colonies or resources, other things like that. I don't necessarily think that that's a huge part of it. I'm not saying like I need access to a grocery store, but I do think it would be nice to have people nearby as opposed to living way out in the middle of nowhere. So that is a factor that I decided to throw in there.
I'm so desperately lonely.
Also, one more thing before we start, I do want to specify what I mean by regions. I am just talking about the map regions. The big map, when you pull it out and it says the different regions that you can go to, that is what I'm talking about. Because I think if I tried to go by colony, I think it would be too long. I'm trying to make this one a little bit shorter so I can focus on some longer ones in the future. Furthermore, I think those more specific locations like individual colonies actually will inform what my decision is on those larger areas, so I think it's all for the best that we just kind of focus on the very large regions.
Yeah, okay, that's smart.
One final note before we start. I beg of you to please go easy on me as I mispronounce these regions. I will mispronounce probably minimum 25% of them, and I am not proud of that fact, but I can't read or pronounce things. So I just want to get that out there. I'm probably gonna mispronounce things or pronounce them way differently than they pronounce them in the game, and that's no one's fault but my own. But when you call me on it, please don't be too mean about it.
You watch your mouth before I show you the back of my hand.
So, with that in mind, let's get started. We're gonna rank these regions based on how livable they are, starting with the least livable location. And the least livable location, I think, by far is the origin. So that's kind of what I meant when I said that the beginning is gonna be a little bit predictable, because I don't think anybody is gonna say differently. Origin is definitely the least livable location in the game. For one, it's got the worst weather. It's just black fog all day, every day. It sounds awful. It sounds like you can't see very well. So you don't even have any good views. That takes away the aesthetic. The aesthetic of the entire world is machine, which is cool if you like machines, but all of the other regions have machine aesthetic too, along with other types of things. The origin is one note. You can't say it's not.
You basic.
Furthermore, it's so far away from everything else. That's the whole point of like the final chapter of the game, is that we have to force our way into Origin. Just so we can get there, we have to get a special boat, and we have to have a whole backup crew ready to fend off any obstacles that might be in the way. It is an insanely inconvenient location to live in. When I say I'd like some proximity to people, this is what I mean by it's way too far out of the way. Who wants to live there?
Not me.
Okay, next up on our list is going to have to be the Kevis Castle region. The Kevis Castle region is a region that is very, very cool in a video game. But if you were trying to live there, that is probably one of the more unpleasant regions to have to live in. There seems to be one predominant type of weather in that region, and it's rain or thunderstorms. So that's not really fun. Furthermore, while the view is very cool, it is also kind of hard to see because of all the black fog, just like in the Origin. And also, thinking about it a little bit, it is kind of a depressing view. It's cool, but also kind of depressing.
Kind of grim. I'd probably take my business elsewhere.
There's not a lot of nature coming into play in this region, and it makes it feel very desolate. And furthermore, on top of all of that, there's only one colony in this region, and they're dicks. The whole colony is a bunch of douchebags. So they're not even the best colony to hang out with. I mean, granted, I still did hang out with them, but I didn't really enjoy myself, say as much as I did when I hung out with the crew from Colony Mu.
I think that's an unfair comparison.
Overall, I think this is one location that is much, much cooler when you are just playing as someone else in the game as opposed to having to actually live there. This is not a region that I would want to live in. Another location that I think I would not like to live in is our next location, which is Sword March. Sword March is a tough one because it's a really, really cool location, but it also doesn't have a lot going on, really. Especially since in this list, we're talking about Sword March after it's been separated from the city, so there really isn't a lot going on there. The only reason that we ever really went to Sword March was because of the city. But now that the city's moved to the middle of the ocean, I think, it's now no longer part of this region, and so it makes it a lot more difficult to rank this region because it has nothing, really.
There's nothing to do here. There's nothing. There's just... I mean, there's nothing.
It doesn't have any colonies, and now that it doesn't have access to the city, it doesn't have anything going for it. But it's a lot prettier. It's a lot prettier than the Origin or Kevis Castle. Plus, the weather is much nicer. There's not as much black fog. There is a little bit, but there's not nearly as much. And there seems to be a pretty normal climate. It's, there's sun and rain and everything in between. Plus, it's just kind of a cool location with the giant swords sticking right out of the ground right in front of you. It's pretty neat. So I think there is something to say about the aesthetic of this location.
This is a cool place.
However, again, there is not much going for it, and furthermore, it's not even that big of a location. It's just a little bit bigger than our next location on the list, which is Agnes Castle. Now, Agnes Castle has the benefit of having much nicer weather. I don't remember ever going there and having it rain. Also, the view is much nicer. I will have to give it that. The reason, though, it's so far down on this list is, for one, it's so small. There's not a lot to work with, so you're very limited in what you can do and where you can go. And for two, you don't really have access to a lot of other colonies. You do have access to the city folk and some Agnians from the castle, but if you want to actually access any of the resources from the city folk, you have to physically go to the city to get them. So it's not that much of a benefit, although they do have the direct shuttle, so that is something.
So that's super convenient.
All in all, I think it's just a little too industrial and not natural enough for my tastes. Like I said, I do want there to be a balance between them. I don't want it to be just all machinery, and in this instance, it's just all castle, right? It's just all kind of similar color and look. There's just definitely something lacking with Agnes Castle that made it come so low on the list.
It's too plain.
Okay, now we're moving on into the more difficult to decide regions. We got 5 main big ones left, and I'm going to maybe make a controversial decision right here and say that the city is smack dab in the middle. That's right, the city is the next one on our list. The city is awesome. It's one of the coolest locations in the game, in my opinion. It's really, especially for what it is, for like what it stands for, the importance it plays in the story. It can't be understated how amazing the city is and how important the city is in the game. That being said, I'm not just ranking it on importance. I'm also ranking it on a couple other things. So the main problem with the city is that it's so insular. It seems that most of the city folk, unless you're part of the Lost Numbers, don't get to leave the city without permission, which it does seem like that's a reasonable rule to have for these city folk, but at the same time, it also makes it a bit limiting in what you can do.
That would suck.
Also, the weather is non-existent. There is no weather. So I don't know if that's a plus or a minus. I don't know if that's a pro or a con. Because on the one hand, it's nice to know that you'll never get rained on or, you know, have any really bad weather that'll destroy your house. But on the other hand, you don't have any sunlight ever. And I imagine that would get a little depressing. And I do speak a little bit from personal experience on this because of the fact that I had to live the entirety of this winter without a window. I would say I probably lived about 6-7 months without a window. And it was very, very dark and sad. And it was very difficult to put up with after a while. I did have a couple holes. I think the holes saved me, my window holes. Shout out to the holes. So I think that's the main reason that the city isn't higher up on this list, because of how much I love it. It should be higher on this list, but I can't put it higher because it doesn't have access to any sunlight. And while you have some access to nature, you don't have nearly as much as, say, like a New Yorker with Central Park. But the reason that the city isn't lower on the list is, well, that should probably be obvious. It's the city. It's awesome. If it did have access to like a little balcony area where there were some more trees or something, I think this would probably be higher on the list because it has so much to offer. It is probably the closest I would get to living in the real world in this game. It's the closest we have to our society in the game. So there's also that benefit of having people around me that would live for the whole time that I would be there. So that'd be nice. That would be nice. Plus, of course, it has the most access to art, literature, knowledge, culture, and all that good stuff that you need to have a society thrive. So in a lot of ways, the city is one of the best places to live. But the reason I put it so low is I think I would struggle a lot with the complete severance from the outside world. And I think it would be easier for me to move to a location near the city and then visit it whenever I'd like. That would probably be something I'd be more down to do.
It's close to the city center, which according to these shows is important.
Okay, our next region on our list is the Aetia region. This is the region where our stories start, so there is a little bit of nostalgia attached to it, and furthermore, it's just a pretty nice region, all things considered. This is also the first region that is home to more than one community. While Agnes Castle did house both city folk and Agnians, they weren't in a separate colony. This region has two separate distinct colonies in Colony 9 and Colony Gamma. And that's not even including Colony 0 and Colony Omega. Those are different. We're not including those. This is namely because Colony Omega is completely abandoned and Colony 0 is a nomadic colony, and it eventually settled down in Legart prison camp, which is not in this region. So they're not permanent members of the Aetia region, but that being said, they deserve a mention.
Barely.
This region is also just very pretty. It's got a lot of cool things going on for it, and it's got a pretty nice climate once you leave the beginning of the game with all the black fog. It's not as pretty as some of the other locations that are higher on this list, but it is much prettier than, say, the Origin, which is why I eventually decided that it's the 4th most livable region. Okay, number 3 most livable location on our list is the Fornis region. I very much like the Fornis region. I feel like we spent the longest there out of the entire game, but I could be wrong about that. It just feels like it. This region is very, very cool. It's got a lot of cool things going for it, and plus, it's more diverse in terms of types of life and types of ecosystems that exist. It's got a desert, it's got a lake region, it's got a big plain, it's got all kinds of wild stuff. It's a pretty cool and very diverse location in terms of what you're gonna find there.
There's so much to do here.
Now, a big drawback for this region is the weather. On the one hand, you can have, clear, overcast skies, but on the other hand, you can have rain or storms, or the worst is sandstorms, which is just not a pleasant thing to have in a place that you're living. So that is a knock against the region. But a huge bonus for the region is it has actually 3 separate colonies in it. It has Colony 4, Colony Iota, and Colony 30. So you have a lot of access to a lot of different people and a lot of different types of knowledge. So that's a really big bonus for this region. And that's why I think it's one of the main reasons it's so far up on the list is how many people you have access to in this region. Plus, on top of that, how pretty it is. Okay, and with that, we're on to our final 2 regions. I think the second most livable location in this game is probably the Pentelis region. Pentelis, whatever. Pentelis. Pentelis.
Do you know how crazy you sound right now?
Whatever, you know what I'm talking about. I am really, really drawn to this region. I think it's one of the more beautiful locations in the game. I think it's really, really cool to see the remnants of these cities that now I know what they are, but it's very cool to see them kind of splayed out against the backdrop of nature overtaking them. I think that's really, really neat, and it's kind of haunting as well. It's very scary.
So spooky, oof!
Furthermore, the Pentelis region has this really cool waterfall area. That's where Colony Lambda is. I love that area. I think that's where I'd build my house. If I had to live there, if I had to move there, that's where I'd build my house. Except I'd build it on top of the waterfalls. But that's neither here nor there. And Colony Lambda has proven that not only is this region one of the prettier regions, it's also one of the more resource-rich regions, because those guys are just swimming in ether. And they just really know what they're doing when it comes to surviving on their own. So I don't know how important ether would be in the life that I would live in this game, but I feel like it would be important on some level. I feel like I could at least sell it, if nothing else. So the abundance of ether in this region is another bonus that I didn't even consider when I put it in the number 2 slot.
Consider that a bonus.
But on top of Colony Lambda, who could probably be the ones to teach you how to mine all that ether, you also have Colony Tau, who could be the ones to teach you how to farm, and that's a really helpful skill as well. Colony Tau is probably one of the more self-sufficient colonies in this game. They know how to grow food on their own and basically survive on their own. Plus you have Mock the Wildwood, which is a really interesting location. You have the Deep area, which I probably would never go in, but you do have it if you need it. But you also have just that whole forested region, which I imagine has a lot of different stuff growing in there. It's probably a great source of resources. So you can't underestimate the value of having an entire rainforest at your disposal.
That does sound nice.
That being said, it is just a little bit desolate. There are those abandoned buildings, and while they're very, very cool, they're also kind of depressing. And there's probably not a lot of easy ways to get around that location. Sure, you have the path up the waterfall, that's easy enough, but then you get to the rope sliding and things get complicated.
Oh!
It's not a race, Dwight.
And so that's why I think I didn't put this region as number 1, despite the fact that I was gushing about it for as long as I was. I think it's just shy of being the best. And of course that only leaves us with the best region to settle down in, the most livable area in my opinion. And that's the Cadencia region. I do not know how to say the name of this region. I have said it so many different ways in this playthrough. I've said Cadencia, Cadencia. I don't know what it is, so sorry if I pronounce it differently throughout this whole video too. I don't mean to, I just can't. I can't say names of things.
I'm a fucking moron.
But despite the fact that I can't pronounce the name of this region, I do think it is probably the coolest region to settle down in. For one, this region technically houses Sword March in it. While Sword March is a separate location on the map, you can see that it's inside the Cadencia region. So while I can't count Sword March as part of this region entirely, I can say that it makes it way easier to access that region. So if you ever did want to go to Sword March for whatever reason, it's a lot easier to get there because it is right there. Another point in its favor seems to be that the city is still housed in this region, so regardless of whether it's housed in Sword March or in this region, it's still housed in the Cadencia region overall. That means this is probably one of the easiest regions to live in while still having access to the city, while not living in the city, which is the exact kind of region I said I would probably end up wanting to move in. That makes sense.
Yeah. That tracks.
When it comes to the weather, it is all kind of all over the place, but that is what you should expect when you're out at sea. That's not very surprising, and it's also not really that bad. It's not really a knock against it. It's not like the Kevis Castle region where it has black fog all over it and it never sees the light of day. You do get your sunny, beautiful, breezy beach days, which is the exact kind of day I would want while living here, and you just gotta put up with the bad weather. That's life. You put up with bad weather wherever you go. Every single location I've talked about, all of their weather has been all over the place, except for, like, Origin and the city. Shocker. Now, going into the biggest reason I want to live here, it has to be because it's so beautiful. I remember very distinctly Mio and Tyon having a conversation about how beautiful it was, and Tyon mentioning it was the fact that everyone drowned as opposed to killing each other, and that's why it's so pristine.
It's gorgeous. I can hardly believe my eyes. Is this real?
We don't wage many battles at sea, so makes sense the seas would be relatively untouched.
Aha.
When people do die at sea, it's usually due to their Fornis sinking. They drown.
So it's not the best backstory for the region, but it does support the idea that this is an essentially untouched region. It's one of the least war-torn areas in the entire game, and its looks reflect that. It's very pretty, and it's hard to ignore how nice it is there. So I realize I just said that the prettiness is the main reason I wanted to move here, but I'd say that's actually not entirely true. I'd have two equally important reasons for wanting to live here, one being that it's so beautiful, and the second being the colonies that are available to us. Now, admittedly, you don't get to keep Colony 15 in this region. Colony 15 eventually moves on to the city, so that doesn't really count, but we do meet Colony 15 in this region, and so we do learn that they are able to fish, and maybe we learn a little bit from them. I do know that they joined the Lost Numbers. I believe they'd probably be out and about every now and then. I'm sure we'd run into them and ask them for a little bit of help and guidance, and I'm sure they'd give it to us because they're pretty nice people, honestly. The Colony 15 guys, a little rough around the edges, but they're nice folk.
You're good, simple people.
And then beyond Colony 15, we have the two main colonies of this region that stay in this region. They don't move. And they're both just awesome colonies. They really are. First, we have Colony Mew. Who doesn't love Colony Mew? They are just the sweetest little baby angels. Every single one of them are like 3 years old. They're just so precious. They're just so innocent. And they're just so little, baby, little faces, little...
Come here, little squishy.
Beyond Colony Mew being home to just the most adorable little babies ever, it's also just a really, really nice place. It's very pretty. It has the Bed of Woes and Wishes, which is not a great name for it, but it's a very nice location. And it also has their little ranch. The little ranch that they started. Those guys know what they're doing. They're getting more and more self-sufficient every day, and I'm sure they could teach us a few things. And then we have the Lost Colony. One of the coolest colonies in the game. I just really love it. I think it's awesome, and I think it's also just very inspiring in the story. I think it's really, really cool, the fact that they are completely self-sufficient, completely hidden from the rest of the world, and just minding their own business. They are the kings and queens of staying in their lane.
I respect that.
Not only are they peaceful and kind and self-sufficient, but they also live in one of the most beautiful locations in the game. That Saffronia tree canopy they have going on, are you kidding me? Wild, absolutely wild. This colony alone is enough to bump this entire region up on the list, and it was already pretty much at the front of the list anyway, which is why it is my #1 location to move into. I would have to move into the Cadencia region and sit on the beach and look up at the Saffronia trees and go fishing and all kinds of wonderful things.
This is the life.
Oh, right, guys, you know what? That's gonna have to do it for me today. This list was all the regions in the game ranked on how livable they are. And I think I did a pretty good job, according to me, and me alone.
I am pretty wisdomous.
I do think that even if the region isn't livable, that doesn't make it a bad region. I probably should have said that at the beginning. If one of your favorite regions is like the Origin, just because it's last on the list doesn't mean it's the worst region. It's one of the coolest video game locations ever, honestly. It's awesome, but it's also a terrible place to live. I think you'd have to agree with me on that.
No, I don't.
So come back next time when I make another Xenoblade 3 ranking list. I don't know what it will be, but it will be something, so. Until then, if you made it this far, thank you so much for joining me today. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. If you liked this video, hit that like button. If you hated this video, hit that dislike button. And either way, hit subscribe. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
So long.